what better way to determine the future of the Impossible Burger than doing a blind taste test? So I've asked Landry Ayres, one of our production team, to join us in the studio and taste test one of these Impossible Burgers versus a real burger. So Landry, thank you so much for opening your stomach for science.
Glad to be here.
Now, I didn't expect you to take blind taste tests quite so literally, but this bandana you're wearing it befits you.
For science, I want to make sure that everything is as it needs to be to have this be the most rigorous experiment possible.
It's an N of one, but a very significant one. So why don't we start? As you take the burger on the right.
Burger on the right.
Give it a good old bite, good old hee-haw, and get first impressions.
Okay. All right. Burger on the right. If it is impossible, having not looked at it at all, I wouldn't be able to tell. Tastes like meat. Pretty good amount of flavor. Not too dry. It seems good to me. I don't know what kind of price range we're at here, but a pretty tasty burger. So,
okay.
I enjoyed it.
Okay, now why don't we do burger on the left and tell me what you think, and we'll do a guess. Which one do you think is the Impossible Burger?
The bun feels the same, so no hints so far. Okay. I feel like this one has a little bit less of a meaty taste. It is not like it is significantly more planty in flavor, but I feel like I just got much more of that sort of like – I got a very like recognizable like what the idea of beef is to me from the first one. So if that is the Impossible Burger, the first one, it could be that they just have really figured out how to distill like the idea of beef and inject it in there. Or maybe I know my beef. So
all right. So gun to your head, which one do you think is the Impossible Burger, right or left?
Which one is the Impossible Burger? I'm gonna guess the one that I ate second, the one on the left. Just first impressions alone.
Okay. How about you? Let's take off your blindfold and take a visual inspection. See if that changes your
good idea.
Opinion.
One moment.
Through the power of audio editing, this will never have happened.
Okay, so I'm looking at the one that I ate first. Interesting. Now the second one. A little bit more pinkish, I feel like, on the second one. You know, not being a grill master per se, I don't know if I would be able to tell the difference without looking closely, but now I'm a little torn, I will say.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, maybe it may surprise you to learn that you were wrong in the first place, that the burger on the right, your first burger, is the Impossible Burger, on the left is the real one. So,
fascinating. Yeah. I don't know if they've made a convert out of me, but I'm certainly much more of a believer than I was prior to this recording, I must say.
I do think the blind taste test bit matters because you have, once you've seen one, you can kind of identify the Impossible Burger just on look alone because it just looks a little bit – the grain looks a little bit different.
I agree. And looking at it now, I was about to say but I hesitated because I didn't consider myself an expert. But I can see some of the texture looks a little bit more almost like black bean patty-esque, like it was put together, whereas the meat tends to feel like it was, it's its own thing separately. But
if that's all the difference, I mean, what matters to me is how it tastes. What it's like in the mouth.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would not have known.
Yeah. Well,
science is amazing.
After hearing Landry lasciviously munch his way through a burger, I'm feeling about 50% suddenly hungry and 50% utterly disgusted. And while this is obviously just one person, it's just mere anecdote, the fact that the taste of the two burgers was so close they couldn't tell which was which, it's a sign that meat alternatives have become a true alternative. Right now, the cost of the Impossible Burger is still several times the cost per ounce of ground beef. But if consumers adopt it, then economies of scale should eventually make it price competitive with traditional beef, along with all the added environmental and cultural benefits. I wanted to know more about the future of meat alternatives, so I went to the Impossible Foods headquarters in Silicon Valley to meet with Rebecca Moses.
I'm Rebecca Moses. I'm our head of impact strategy. So what that means is, as a business, kind of our core mandate is help create a food system that's much more sustainable, create these environmental savings around land, water, greenhouse gas emissions. And so we can do that really through core business. We can do that through product. We can do that through the markets that we roll out in. And so thinking about the ways that we can maximize that environmental impact, the ways that we can kind of create change agents out of our consumers, that's a big part of my job.
And so maybe we should set a baseline, which is what we're deviating from here. What is the problem with just frying up a good old burger? If it's 4th of July, fireworks later that night, frying a burger on my grill, why is that potentially a problem?
Beef comes from cattle. And so cattle are just a really, really inefficient way of getting calories and protein out of plants and onto your plate, to the tune of like a 97% loss in the amount of calories and protein that were originally in those plants. And so, look, you scale this up, you think about currently more than 7 billion people on the planet, we're eating more and more beef. The cost of what that's doing in terms of our environment is fundamentally going to compromise food security moving forward. I mean, you can't really overstate the urgency of this. It's hard to overstate the level of problem that we're looking at in terms of biodiversity loss, in terms of the opportunity cost of the land that we're using and the carbon capture that could be there. So it's finding different ways to shift our food system, finding really kind of transformative solutions where people don't have to be convinced of behavior change. That's really what the company is about, finding that perfect product that can be much more sustainable, still meeting those needs that a consumer has. You want it to be good. You want it to sizzle on a grill. But the system does need to change. It's just environmentally untenable.
I'm reminded of the statistics about the rate of, I suppose we can say, economic growth in the developing world. And something that's a bit of a constant in human history is that as people become wealthier, as a society becomes more prosperous, they eat more meat. Now, I have heard that there's a kind of a counter to that, which is that some of the most environmentally damaging meat that's produced is in places like sub-Saharan Africa. So what does Impossible Foods have what's the vision for a world in which products like Impossible Foods are more widely used, not just in the United States, but globally? Is the world in which no meat is consumed? Where should this impact be felt first?
Well, it's definitely true that emerging economies are seeing a huge boost in their demand for meat products. That includes dairy, it includes pork. Certainly cattle is the one that, as an environmental person, that really scares me. But the Western world and other economies have been eating meat to a huge extent for a very long time. So we've already kind of set that environmental footprint. Like this is what we did. As those countries and as those economies start adding meat consumers, what's really important is that we provide new technologies or new ways of getting that same experience, the nutrition, the food culture synchronicity, finding new ways of getting a product to them that can leapfrog the effects of what would otherwise happen if that were to come from animals. So we're already completely, I'd say, biophysically maxed out in terms of what we can do with livestock scaling. It's already 30 to 50% of our land area. Compare that to just 3% for urban places, urban environments where humans live and work. It's a tremendous use of land, tremendous opportunity cost for carbon. And if we expand that system, we make our footprint even bigger. The outcomes for food security are going to be pretty dire. These new consumers absolutely deserve good nutrition, good experience with food, the same access to the things that the rest of the world has, decided they're going to enjoy too. And finding new ways to provide that, it's part of the reason that we're in Hong Kong and Macau and Singapore. That's where emerging growth is happening. And in a lot of cases, that's coming out of other countries. You have virtual resource flows feeding demand for cattle in Asia is coming out of the Latin American tropics. And we need to preserve these places. We all need to change the way we eat, especially those of us who are already consuming a lot of meat.
So let's take, say, a pound worth of traditional ground beef you buy at the store. And let's say you got a pound of Impossible Burger, though I think it's sold in 12-ounce chunks at the moment. But let's say a pound. So pound for pound, what's the difference in terms of greenhouse gas emissions or environmental impact factor to get to the one versus to the other?
So what we did is we have a full life cycle assessment. This is how we know what these numbers are. And we basically took Impossible Burger and we said, all right, we know what all these impacts are. And then we compared that to a very typical feedstock, or rather feedlot operation in the United States. So that's traditionally regarded as like the most efficient beef can get, is a situation that's not very good for the cow. But and so across the board, we're about 89% more efficient in terms of our greenhouse gases. We use or generate far, far less. 87% more efficient in terms of water, and 96% more efficient in terms of land use. And on a per pound basis, I believe that translates to about 90 gallons of water. It's a little under 300 square feet of land spared, and it is about 30 pounds of carbon equivalents that are spared.
Then maybe we should talk to what actually goes into the Impossible Burger. What's the key ingredient that makes it so impossibly burger-like?
Heme is our magic ingredient. It's really the kind of catalyst for why the product can behave like beef in terms of cooking and changing color and the flavors and the sensory experience that you are familiar with from beef. Heme in high abundance in red meat is what causes that. So this molecule is found in every living organism in high abundance in things like red meat. And we clearly weren't going to go to animals for that source, even though it's really important for how meat cooks. What we did was we found that molecule in a protein expressed in the root nodules of soy plants. It was well known that this existed. It's called leg hemoglobin. We were just the first to figure out how to put it into food. So we don't harvest that from the root nodules of soy plants. We produce that in yeast fermentation cultures, similar to how you'd produce rennet for hard cheese or Belgian beer even. Much more sustainable for us. And so that's the key ingredient that goes in with protein from soy, protein from potato, coconut oil, and sunflower oil. And it allows us to replicate what that experience is, from cooking to tasting to largely nutrition. Heme is super important for that.
Now, this was, as I understand it, Patrick Brown, who's the kind of original founders, scientist by training. This was his insight, right? The idea that heme, we don't need it from animals or from meat, though obviously that's a rich source of it, but we can extract it from I don't know if soy was his initial thought. How did this occur? Do you have a story about how this came to him?
Pat has such a great story for how he came to this. I mean, he was not in food manufacturing at all. I mean, he was a biochemist at Stanford, sort of an atypical CEO and founder for a startup. And he is just someone who kind of sits around and thinks about how to save the environment. So over the course of doing so, during a sabbatical year that he had from Stanford, he sort of arrived at the conclusion that consumers are the most important thing that you can leverage to spare the environment. You can't ask for behavior change, but you have in the US more than 300 million people who you can potentially create as change agents if you can help change the way that they eat without asking them to compromise. And so his thought was, well, I know the livestock sector is the absolute predominant driver of these things like biodiversity loss, of climate contributions, of carbon capture losses. So how do I build a better mousetrap? Like, how do you make a better product that's more sustainable but still delivers that experience? And so he started this company to make meat from plants, knowing that was going to be much more sustainable. Early on, I mean, he assembled this group of wonderful scientists, and their kind of initial hypothesis was, what's so different? Why can't a veggie burger like we have on the shelves now, why can't that act like meat? Why is it just not as good? Well, heme is really important. It's in the myoglobin of your blood and in hemoglobin, and we, as a company, have really found that's important for how our product behaves. So he came to that idea just trying to figure out how do you, from the ground up, build a product that can be made from plants, that can be delicious, that can really create that experience of meat. So they did testing, figured out, yeah, this is from a sensory perspective, from a chemical perspective, it's important for how meat does what it does.
The idea of using soy-based, soy as an alternative to meat, and we've had veggie burgers for some time. This is not like that part of it. The idea of a meat alternative based on soy is not brand new. I mean, the heme element is, but that's not brand new. And between Impossible Foods and Beyond Burger, we have two competitors, both with a lot of excitement, a lot of attention in this space. So why now? And they use different means. I mean, Impossible's got heme, Beyond Burger has their own approach using a different protein base. But why at this moment, as opposed to any other point in the last, say, 30 years, do you think this is really attracting so much excitement? Is it cultural? Is it economic? Is it technological?
It's probably a little bit of everything. I think the reason we're seeing kind of a sea change in how we're approaching food technology and food systems has to do to some extent with, oh God, we're recognizing that the climate issue is incredibly urgent, maybe more so than we thought. We're recognizing that our food systems are kind of in peril if we keep on eating the way that we do. Clearly, that's an incentive for founders to kind of get into this, but you need the economic component. So between kind of recognizing that there's a need for it from just a planetary resilience perspective, from investors recognizing this is a massive $1 trillion market, tons of room for growth, that it's not only is it a huge existing market, but the additional market of emerging economies, there's a very good way to make money from this. Third, the technology associated with how we produce heme, how we can go down to a molecular level and figure out how to reverse engineer from plant ingredients what the experience of meat is. It all came together at a perfect time, and we've really seen clearly the proof of concept and the investment excitement for it.
On the kind of economic point, on the price point, so my understanding is that 12 ounces of Impossible Burger ground beef is like $9 for 12 ounces, which is you can get a pound, so a little more than that, of ground beef for $3-4. So we're talking about Impossible Burgers costing about 3 times as much for weight, maybe a little more compared to regular beef. So right now, we're still asking, Impossible Burgers is still asking people to pay a premium for a variety of good reasons, to help save the environment, more sustainability, et cetera. Are there efficiencies that do you see that price coming down? Is there a way to make that cheaper, to make it more price competitive with beef in the medium term?
Sure. And two things. It really depends on where you're purchasing Impossible Burger, Impossible Lasagna, Impossible, beef bolognese, whatever it was turned into, wherever you're purchasing that. If it's from a restaurant partner, that price can be really variable. So I'm from Minnesota. I was really excited when we launched with White Castle.
Oh,
so
nice,
it's like $2 a slider, right? And so
Right.
my dad can eat that, and he's super cheap, and he can't eat cholesterol. So that's great for him. At the same time, you can get it at a really fancy restaurant. That's very similar to how ground beef is marketed, right? Depending on where you are, you're going to get kind of a different experience, different price point. The Whopper is a Impossible Whopper is $1 more. The intent is 100% to bring the costs down eventually, or to bring the price down as a result. And through economies of scale, we can definitely do that. Just thinking about what our supply chain is versus what it takes to create an animal from feed crops to rearing it over years to slaughter, taking plant ingredients and fundamentally squishing them together, we can bring those costs down.
Because you can see the real transformative effect happening when people who are they're on the fence about, maybe they do care about helping the environment, but at the end of the day, they want something that tastes comparable, and that is but they're not willing to pay much of a premium for that because they're just looking for the cheapest thing on the shelf. If you can get that price point closer, that unlocks a huge community of people who they're not doing it for altruistic reasons primarily. That's the bonus for them. It's because, hey, here's a thing that's,
And people will see us all over the country, including in Asia. And I think it's important to remember we're really young as a company. So that price point, we're at small scale.
Yeah.
We have massively expanded production over the past several months to meet demand. And as you scale, of course, prices come down. So it's kind of a matter of time. But for right now, it is fairly accessible, and I think we've consumers can kind of see that depending on where they are. But yeah, getting to an accessible price is really important for the mission, the environmental mission. If we look at consumer polling, we look at consumer data, and not just for us, across the board, people might be motivated by sustainability. It doesn't mean you're going to purchase something based on your environmental values. Few people do. And you do actually need an alternative. So the difference between like a Toyota Corolla and a Prius isn't that big. But you don't really have that for a veggie burger. At least we didn't until recently. You don't get the same experience of a veggie burger that you did with beef.
So one of the other, in terms of meat, I don't know if we call this meat alternatives, and we'll get to the alternatives question in a bit here. But the other kind of big startup interest and venture capital interest in this general space of meat and meat alternatives is lab-grown beef or lab-grown meat. Cultured cells and the like, which at this point still is we're years away from serious consumer rollout. It's still fantastically expensive relative to even you guys, but we can imagine a future in which lab-grown meat is price competitive with you guys, with regular beef. What's the argument for Impossible Burgers in that future world, in the world in which you can have meat that is, is not a meat alternative, meat that is molecularly very similar to, it's grown in the lab, but it's meat from a cow originally, has all the environmental benefits, or many of the environmental benefits, or maybe it doesn't, but has some of the environmental benefits of things like Impossible Burgers. Why would consumers choose Impossible Burgers over lab-grown meat in the future in which this, you have this plethora of options in front of you. They're all price competitive. Why still have an Impossible Burger?
Well, I would really turn that premise on its head. I mean, we're looking at what we have, which is a plant-based burger that can function in the same way, deliver the same sensory experience, deliver nutrition. We can keep getting better, right? We can keep on improving. Cattle can't really do that. You have millions of amazing plants, crops that you can go to find these proteins, find these fats and oils, and create something that you don't have to compromise on the experience of. And we're commercially available. Now, looking at a different technology that's much farther out, much harder to prove, I would argue that we have not seen proof of the kind of across-the-board environmental sustainability improvement of that. It's still very early technology, very energy-intensive, so it kind of depends on what grid you're on. But why go with something that's kind of an unproven, exquisite technology when there's an abundance of plant-based options out there, and we can really create that same experience, and it's from kind of known food sources. I think that there is a huge argument to be made that, maybe there's room for all of these things in a future food system if we can get the environmental credentials right, if we can get the nutrition right, the experience and kind of culinary characteristics right. There's room for all of these things if we can hit those marks. Right now, we're showing that we're able to do that. Not sure what the future is going to hold, but
there was kind of a industry movement among vegetable growers and the companies that sell vegetables to, it's been years ago now, but the push for a self-labeling organic label on food, and some sort of industry-run certification system for saying, well, this food is organic, was organically raised via these minimum criteria, et cetera. Is there any interest for Impossible Foods to work with other meat alternatives to do something similar? That this is food that is certified to be, I don't even know what the term would be, but it meets these minimum requirements of sustainability, some sort of self-labeling way of helping consumers identify the environmental impacts of the foods they're eating.
And there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, and on the consumer side, it's not necessarily something that they want to have front of mind, or that currently is front of mind. That's kind of the premise of the product, right? Is that it doesn't have to be. At the same time, we hold ourselves accountable to kind of our own standards. At a certain point, maybe you can see some value in a certification framework. In terms of other kind of agricultural products, there's varying degrees of success with achieving outcomes through that. But for right now, what we do is we really focus on our sustainability credentials and work to optimize those. And if we can be, we are as transparent as possible with that, whether it makes it onto a label. I'm not sure. Maybe in Scandinavia.
That's right. That's right. In fact, I think your founder, I think Patrick Brown, he doesn't like that. I've been using the phrase a lot here, meat alternatives. My understanding, he doesn't like the alternatives part of that. He just wants to call it meat. I suppose the logic is that hema's hema, regardless of whether it's from meat or from soy. Can you flesh that out a little bit for us? Why doesn't he like the term meat alternatives?
I can't speak to Pat's kind of theory on that, although I can kind of take a guess as to, well, how are we defining meat, right? For me, and I think the way that we approach it as a company is whatever you call it, if we are able to deliver a product that can be substituted for a very environmentally intensive product, if you can get consumers to switch over to something without asking them for behavior change, that's really, whatever you call it, that's the goal. And so if it's meat from plants, whatever it is, what we're seeing is 95% adoption by omnivores. And so our audience, our consumers, about 95% of them, 90 to 95% of them, eat meat on a regular basis. So I'm not sure they're too bothered by whatever it's called. Clearly, there's a market for it. They're substituting. That's where you get these environmental outcomes. And I think we'll kind of wait and see how the vernacular develops around meat from plants.
What's the response been like from the vegan, vegetarian community? So on the one hand, the push for here is a thing that is as close to substitute for a burger as possible is by its nature kind of framed around the interests of meat eaters. Like you don't have to sacrifice the things you love about meat when you eat an Impossible Burger. But in a sense, vegetarians and vegans, I imagine, have a bit of an interest in being different. I mean, that appeal wouldn't necessarily work as well with the vegan, vegetarian community. So what's the response been like from the vegan, vegetarian community? And like, do you have a different way of approaching that question for them?
I mean, the vegetarian and vegan communities, it's important to remember they're already kind of doing the right thing when it comes to sustainability and future food security. They're already eating low on the food chain. That said, I mean, if they want to consume the product, that's great. Certainly our market is omnivores. But with vegans and vegetarians, from my personal experience, it's been a big diversity of reactions. Some of them, depending on why they gave up meat in the first place, are like, oh my God, this is the first time I've been able to have a burger in forever. I'm so happy. I love this. I've definitely met a vegan or two who, for them, it's like, I gave up meat because I didn't really like it. This is totally squicking me out, to use a technical term. It's uncanny for them. So it's definitely, there's a kind of a mixed bag there.
So there have been moves so anytime you have a new food technology and there incumbent interests, market dominant actors, they have a natural tendency to want to limit competition from a new kind of upstart technology. This was true of butter producers and margarine. So they passed a law saying you can't color your margarine before you sell it to consumers. So once upon a time, if you're old enough, you remember having to spread a little yellow dye manually after you bought your margarine, which is kind of ludicrous thinking of now. But the idea was butter manufacturers didn't you couldn't call it butter, you had to call it margarine, and you couldn't color it so consumers wouldn't be, I'm doing air quotes here, confused about what actual butter was. We're seeing something similar right now with traditional meat farmers, with livestock associations, cattlemen's associations, pushing for states, most recently Missouri, to ban calling things like Impossible Burger and meat alternatives meat. Does Impossible Burger have a stance on that? What's your response to these attempts to force you to not label what you're calling meat?
I mean, we are so transparent in how we talk about the product, our consumer interactions. We say exactly what's in it. We say it's plant-based burger. And I think we have a lot of faith in consumers that they know what they're eating. They know what their choices are. And so we're gonna leave it to them. And, it is a new frontier for labeling, but we generally put our faith in the folks who are consuming the product and who are choosing it. So, we had a team presence at the UN Climate Week in New York, and it was so motivating to just see there was 3-4 million youth out protesting last week, talking about for Jesus, guys, let's get it together, let's figure out climate change, and can you help us out a little bit, the generations who've been here before. And just the way that I see this product, I think the way that Impossible has evolved, this is a product, this is a toolkit, or rather this is a tool for that toolkit. For the people who are asking for action on climate, for the people who are looking for solutions that are transformative, that aren't just these incremental, tweaks to your supply chain. That's why this was really created. So we're in a zeitgeist of climate urgency, and it's good timing that the plant-based economy is really kind of growing at this exact time. Food, meat, plants, whatever it is, food is so deeply emotional and cultural and significant for people in their daily life. There's certainly going to be a lot of angst around anything that is perceived to be driving scarcity or deprivation. And that's the opposite of what we're doing as a company. And I think the opposite of what the plant-based food movement is doing. This is about abundance. It's not about restricting yourself from something. It's not about, telling people they can't do it. It's about providing a new option and letting consumers decide and become change agents. And, it's not about saying no. It's about, hey, here's a better option. You can take it or leave it.
I'd like to return to a point that we alluded to in the interview. There are incumbent industries who want to see Impossible Foods and other meat alternatives fail. As you can imagine, it's not in the individual interest of cattle ranchers or meat processors for competing products using a completely different supply chain to succeed. And normally that wouldn't be a problem. May the best competitor in the marketplace win. But the meat industry is not a perfectly free market. There are government regulatory agencies on both the state and the federal level that are responsible for all those steaks and burger patties that end up on your plate. And traditional meat producers have been leaning on regulators to make life difficult for their competition. For example, last year, the Missouri Cattlemen's Association got the state legislature to pass a law making it illegal to call meat alternatives meat. A representative from the industry cartel said, quote, "We want to make sure consumers know what they're getting. So if a food was grown in a lab, we want the label to say that." Let me call that logic what it truly is. That's some concern trolling. I no more believe that this law was motivated by a sincere, unalloyed desire for consumer welfare than I believe that consumers are so stupid as to be unable to distinguish between meat from animals and meat from plant protein. Give people a little credit. We aren't complete and utter idiots all the time. But in the long run, these kinds of rearguard battles over captured government regulators will likely fail. There's a long history of similar, ultimately failed attempts, from Big Dairy banning margarine from being called butter or even being colored yellow at point of sale, to the more recent proposal that almond milk not be allowed to be called milk because, quote, almonds can't lactate. It's a sign of fear on the behalf of hidebound incumbent interests. Fear of a future in which people have more, better, and freer choices. And until next time, have a burger and be well. Thanks for listening. Building Tomorrow is produced by Tess Terrible. If you enjoy Building Tomorrow, please subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about libertarianism, find us on the web at www.libertarianism.org.